With tariff talks top of mind, South Florida farmers say they're in trouble. Crops are rotting on the vine, and they're blaming the ongoing trade wars and immigration changes.
If you value the qualitative as opposed to merely the quantitative, I think you'd opt for the Canadian system over the American one.
While hundreds of tons of American grain are being rejected without explanation, Canadian goods are getting loaded straight onto ships, no pallets, no delays. As farmers in Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska scramble to sell soybeans at a loss, growers up in Saskatchewan are raising prices and still can't keep up with the orders. One side is drowning in debt with no way out. The other is raking in profits without lifting a finger on marketing. And somewhere between those two extremes, Donald Trump steps up to the mic and says flatly, "We're still winning." But who exactly is winning when America's supply chain is frozen stiff and Canada is cashing in billions just by watching us stumble? American wheat turns negative when orders are canceled before they're even signed. No official statement, no warning. But the final week of May 2025 marked an unprecedented event for the first time ever. U.S. wheat export orders dropped below zero. According to the USDA, the total volume of canceled wheat purchases exceeded new orders, dragging net sales down to 49,100 metric tons. This isn't just a technical figure, it's a signal that the backbone of one of America's core agricultural commodities is starting to self-destruct. Wheat used to be the son of the plains, the crop that appeared on every table from cheap meals to fine dining. But today, the very grain that once stood for stability has become a surplus no one wants even at a discount. It's not about quality, it's not about yield, it's about trust. Trust in delivery, trust in a consistent supply chain that's slowly evaporating. Longtime buyers like South Korea and the Philippines have quietly shifted away. Their new destinations, Russia, Eastern Europe, and most recently Australia. No press release. No promises of reform. Just a quiet move with heavy meaning retreat. In Kansas, wheat processing plants have stopped hiring for new lines, not because expansion isn't needed, but because they're no longer sure there will be enough grain to run them. In Minneapolis, grain depots are refusing to accept deliveries because storage is full. The wheat is left sitting in trucks, and with every extra day of delay comes more interest owed, more pressure from creditors. Some farmers are being forced to mill their wheat into livestock, feed a final option for those who've run out of choices. But even that path is dimming as meat prices plummet due to oversupply, leaving no clear way out. What makes wheat different isn't just its economic value, it's its symbolic one. When an entire food culture from lunchtime sandwiches to simple bowls of pasta faces the risk of relying on foreign supply, what we're losing isn't just profit, it's a legacy built over generations. Canada hasn't had to fight for any of this. They just deliver on time, on spec, without drama. And in the quiet, unforgiving logic of global trade, one rule always applies: whoever stays steady wins. American soybeans crash, market share flows straight to Brazil. No formal exit was announced, but one glance at the mid-June 2025 price board says that all U.S. soybeans have been pushed to the bottom of the global market's priority list. The average price has dropped to just over $10 per bushel, a 30% plunge from nearly $15 at the end of 2023. Meanwhile, production costs are hovering around 9.65, meaning many farmers are now selling simply to avoid losing more. But beyond the price drop lies an even bigger problem. The market share is gone, vanished before it even had a chance to compete. For most Asian importers, the decision wasn't hard. Brazil now supplies over 70% of soybean imports in many regional markets, according to first quarter 2025 trade data. With consistent harvests, upgraded ports, and a climate advantage, Brazil doesn't have to undercut prices, they just have to stay steady. And that's more than enough. In Iowa, many large farms are now renting out private cold storage just to hold on to unsold soybeans. Not because they believe prices will bounce back anytime soon, but because right now, there's no one buying. Mold pests and rising interest are slowly eating into every bushel, like time chipping away at a savings account quietly but relentlessly. At local grain depots, the trucks are gone. The digital price boards that once flashed by the minute now show a single static line. Purchasing paused, storage full, no truck horns, no hustle and bustle, just a strange, unsettling silence. For many families across the Midwest, soybeans aren't just a cash crop. They're the financial bedrock covering college tuition, paying off mortgages, or securing retirement. But now that entire foundation is on the verge of collapse after just one bad season, loan restructuring applications are piling up at agricultural banks. Some farmers are already preparing bankruptcy papers not because they're giving up, but because there's simply nothing left to hold on to. Meanwhile, Brazil keeps signing new contracts. Ports like Santos and Paranagua are operating at full tilt, and American soybeans, they're still sitting in silos not because of poor quality, but because no one's waiting anymore. The harshest blow isn't the price gap. It's the moment you realize that even when you did everything right, you're still being pushed out of the game. Sorghum and Freefall, America's pride turned into a punchline. It only took the first 2 months of 2025 for U.S. sorghum exports to collapse by a staggering 94%, according to updated USDA data. No need for further explanation. That number alone is enough to silence the once proud fields of Texas and Kansas as if the seeds had never been planted at all. Sorghum isn't a casual crop. It's a strategic choice for water-scarce regions where drought resistance is valued more than yield. But even this grain, once called the backbone of the arid West, can't withstand a new kind of enemy, the vanishing buyer. In Stockton, Kansas, once the nation's leader in sorghum acreage grain silos that used to empty only when sold, now sit empty because there's no demand to fill them. Harvests are still in the ground, with farmers already knowing no one's waiting. Locals call them vaults of forgotten faith. Sorghum prices have now dropped below corn, a rare and alarming sign, not because the quality has declined, but because the entire demand chain from export markets to domestic use has backed out all at once. Some grain traders are blending sorghum into livestock feed to minimize losses, not for nutrition, but just to clear warehouse space. Even that route is shrinking as the meat market is also flooded with excess supply. Bob Graham, a farmer in Amarillo, Texas, says he'll be pausing next season. A soft phrase, but it means he's leaving his land idle, unable to afford seeds or fuel. No one dares predict the future, but people who once weathered droughts and oil shocks are now hesitating because there are no orders. Agricultural credit across the Great Plains is tightening too. Many banks are now requiring a 15% higher down payment before approving seasonal loans. Crop insurance contracts are being scrutinized with stricter clauses than ever before. A harvest with no destination is like a train leaving the station without passengers. No bells, no goodbyes. And that silence in the language of agriculture is the clearest sign of a recession that doesn't need an announcement. Sorghum was once a symbol of resilience. But now when even a crop built to survive the harshest conditions can't make it through this system, the concern is no longer just about one grain. It's about whether we believe in recovery at all. American meat gets stuck in the summer heat when containers turn into ovens. It wasn't a crop failure, it wasn't a lack of demand, it was a lack of movement. That's why starting in April 2025, hundreds of containers filled with beef, chicken, and pork were left sitting at major U.S. ports from Los Angeles to Savannah, spoiling into bio-waste after just a few sunny days. The logistics industry has a grim name for it, a cold jam. From the outside, the containers looked fine. On the inside, the meat was still frozen. But with shipment after shipment flagged for export license rechecks and not enough staff to process them, time became the biggest enemy. Containers sat idle in the sun. Dozens of tons of meat were lost, not due to quality, but waiting on a valid signature. The U.S. Meat Export Federation confirmed that nearly 1,000 meat processing plants were under review for export conditions. Logistics companies unsure how long delays would last began canceling shipping schedules. Refrigerated containers, once symbols of precision and control, turned into costly nightmares. Storage fees skyrocketed from $400 per container to over $100 or $200 in just a few weeks, not including the cost of disposing of spoiled goods. In an industry where speed is survival, every hour of delay is a blow to the supply chain. No one wants to accept meat that might be rejected. No shipping line wants to carry cargo under regulatory limbo. Panic spread quickly, and with it paralysis. In Sioux Falls, a meat plant that once ran 24/7 is now down to a single shift, operating at less than half its capacity compared to the previous quarter. In Iowa and Minnesota, farms are cutting herds fast. One major hog operation in Mower County offloaded over 600 pigs in 2 days at prices 40% below production cost. But the damage didn't stop there. When meat can't be exported, it floods the domestic market, creating localized surpluses. In big cities, supermarkets slashed prices to clear inventory. Meanwhile, in rural and remote states, meat prices soared due to rising transport costs. One product, two completely opposite price trends. And both are bad. One side earns nothing the other can't afford to buy. Consumers are left scratching their heads. In Missouri, one family reported paying 18% more for beef at a local market, while the same cuts were being sold below cost just 100 miles away at a national grocery chain. The meat industry was once the pride of American agriculture, where production quality control and processing capacity led the world. But in 2025, those very strengths became burdens. The system is simply too massive to pivot quickly during a certification and logistics crisis. An industry built to run with clockwork precision is now stalled by paperwork. When meat, the symbol of a full American dinner plate, is being discarded by the container load, the concern isn't just about losses anymore. It's a warning sign if even a cornerstone industry can't keep moving what will happen to the more fragile parts of the economy. Canada quietly surges ahead, from supporting role to rewriting the global agriculture script. The reversal of North American agriculture in 2025 wasn't marked by some shocking event. It didn't begin with a bold decision. It happened quietly through contract after contract slipping from America's hands and landing in those of a neighbor few expected, Canada. In less than a year, the total value of Canada's agricultural exports surged by more than 38%, according to the Canadian Agricultural Statistics Agency. That jump didn't come from flashy PR campaigns, but from a very real shift in global demand as major importers across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East were forced to seek a more reliable supplier to replace the United States. And suddenly the name Canada was being mentioned more than at any time in the past 2 decades. From wheat, soybeans, and frozen meat, to maple syrup animal feed, and even organic grains, anything bearing a Product of Canada label is now treated by global buyers as the default option. While American containers sit stalled at ports due to missing paperwork or short-staffed inspections, ports like Vancouver, Halifax, and Montreal are operating at near full capacity. There was no need to rush, no need to fight for the spotlight. Canada didn't advance by trying to dominate, it simply stayed steady. When importers couldn't be sure if US goods would arrive on time, choosing Canadian products became the path of least resistance. And Saskatchewan, once dubbed the Northern Transit Hub, international trader traffic nearly doubled in just 2 quarters. Alberta, the heart of Canada's meat industry, saw cold chain exports rise by over 23% year over year. Ironically, much of that cargo left the country using containers leased from US logistics companies whose equipment was sitting idle for lack of American exports. The irony isn't about who's better, it's about who didn't miss a beat. While US, farmers struggled under bank debt, unsold stock, and rising storage costs, Canadian farmers got green lights from their government support to switch crops, access to equipment loans, and trade agreements that secured new buyers. Canada's government also shifted its approach to the domestic market. The once emotional slogan, "Buy Canadian," has now become policy. Supermarkets in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia are shrinking shelf space for US goods, replacing them with local products that come with shorter supply chains and more competitive pricing. No need for patriotic campaigns, consumers only had to look at their receipts to see the difference. This surge wasn't luck. It was a chain reaction set off by the gaps America left behind. While Americans argue over what went wrong, Canadians are already moving forward, stepping neatly into the role the US used to play. If 2024 was the year Canada was seen as just a follower, then 2025 is proving the opposite in a long-distance race. The winner isn't the one who starts in front, it's the one who never stops running. Bankruptcy is no longer the exception. It's become a second season in rural America. There were no sirens, no bold headlines, but across the Midwest, the unusual silence hanging over the fields says what the data only hints at: American farmers are going bankrupt in waves, and this time, no one's sure they'll make it to next season. According to the latest report from the federal court, by mid-2025, Chapter 12 bankruptcy filings created specifically for farmers and fishermen have jumped more than 55% compared to 2023. But if you focus only on that number, you'll miss the bigger picture: an agricultural network quietly unraveling piece by piece. Because when a farm collapses, it's not just an economic loss, it's the severing of ties to the land, the erosion of generational legacy, and the crumbling of a rural credit system that's been fragile for years. In places like Nebraska and Iowa, each planting season comes with a loan for seeds, for equipment, rentals, for weather insurance, all with the hope that a buyer is waiting come harvest. But when the market vanishes and commercial interest rates spike, all that math falls apart. A 2,000-acre farm in Clay County, Nebraska, was forced to liquidate collateral just to cover $40,000 in fertilizer costs, a sum that's less than 3% of the land's total value. But in the current credit system, even a minor choke point can squeeze the life out of a family's entire financial cycle. In Ohio, local banks are tightening the screws. Down payments that used to be 10% are now 20%, and many lenders won't even consider a loan without a confirmed sales contract, an almost impossible ask in a world where international orders are being delayed or canceled without warning. But this collapse isn't just numbers on paper. You can see it in the rushed meetings between farmers and bankers, and spreadsheets tinted red, like dried blood trailing down the debt columns. It's there in the decisions to delay upgrades, freeze spending, and let go of seasonal workers who've been around for decades. In South Dakota, a farmer burnt the blueprint for a new grain shed he'd saved up to build next spring. No point building it, he said. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet sentence like he'd been rehearsing it in his mind for weeks. And then, silence. Not because they don't want to fight, but because there's no time left to fight. They're too busy sorting paperwork, calling lawyers, and considering applying to work full-time on land they once owned. This wave of bankruptcies isn't like anything we've seen before. It's not a drought. It's not crop failure. It's not the usual price swings. It's the result of an invisible but brutal chain reaction supply chains out of sync markets, pulling back financing costs, soaring, and most of all, the exhaustion after years of hanging on with no recovery in sight. The quiet question many farmers are now asking themselves isn't, how do I get through this, but is it even worth it anymore? And when more and more of them start answering no, the loss isn't just a farm, it's a missing link in a food system we once thought could never be broken. Asia isn't turning its back with words. They're doing it with contracts and silence. There were no dramatic announcements, no public protests, but Asian markets are making one thing clear: they've stopped waiting. They're switching partners, redirecting capital, and withdrawing trust, the very foundation of global trade. For years, seeing made in USA on a wheat, soybean, or pork contract wasn't just about origin. It was a promise of reliable supply chains, proven logistics, and delivery schedules that ran like clockwork. But by 2025, that reputation built on performance and consistency is beginning to crack. Not because of one big event, but because of small breakdowns repeated too many times with no more patience left to cushion the impact. In the Philippines, food processors are now signing new wheat contracts with Australia, even if it costs them $6, $8 more per ton, just to ensure peace of mind. Guaranteed arrival. No paperwork delays. No shipment stuck because of missing cold chain codes. In South Korea, instant noodle giants, some of the region's largest wheat buyers, added a new clause in all contracts starting Q2 2025. Flexible source substitution. If any disruption comes from the US, they'll automatically switch to Russia, Kazakhstan, or Eastern Europe. No renegotiation needed. This isn't a contingency plan anymore. It's standard operating procedure, and that's how US products are being quietly pushed out of the game without a single word spoken. Wheat is just the beginning. US soybeans, frozen meats, corn, even dairy are disappearing from bidding lists in Jakarta, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, and Taipei. Not because of quality issues, but because of rising uncertainty around timing, reliability, and unpredictable extra costs. A container delayed 3 days, that's a lost shipment. A vessel 5 days late, that's a broken supermarket supply deal. In a world where profit margins are calculated by the hour, no one is willing to bet their business on instability, even from the world's former door one. National reputations don't collapse overnight. They fade through late deliveries, missed calls, and emails asking for just a little more time. And when importers stop planning 6 months ahead with the US, it's not just a lost order, it's losing a seat in the global supply chain strategy. At the government level, Asian nations aren't calling out America publicly, but their actions speak volumes. By redirecting imports from the US to South America, Australia, and Eastern Europe, they're sending a policy signal loud and clear. They don't want promises, they want timing. Guaranteed maximum delays, a system that can be forecast and counted on. And right now, America is failing to deliver even the basics. Shipping insurers have raised premiums on US origin containers after 3 straight quarters of scheduling issues. Some Asian ports like Busan and Klang are now deprioritizing West Coast US vessels due to inconsistent port calls. When countries stop building long-term plans with you, it means they've quietly moved on. No announcement, just a shift. And once that happens, no amount of policy can instantly win them back. Trust once withdrawn from the flow of trade rarely returns the same way it left. That's the hard truth facing American agriculture in 2025. It's not losing because the products are bad. It's losing because the US no longer holds a guaranteed spot in the minds of those who once saw it as the gold standard. American logistics has seized up when the food we grow can't even leave the country. In today's agricultural world, logistics isn't just a middleman. It's the backbone that keeps the entire system alive, from farm fields to grocery shelves, from harvesters in Iowa to container ships in Long Beach. But by 2025, that system has stopped humming. It stutters, stalls, and falls silent like a body cut off from its lifeblood without warning. At the Port of Portland, vessel calls dropped by more than 50% in the first quarter. Tacoma saw a 28% decline. Even Los Angeles, America's largest port, reported nearly a 20% drop in traffic. On a graph, those numbers might seem manageable, but on the ground, they've triggered a domino effect. Up and down the supply chain, shipments are stuck. Contracts pushed back indefinitely, and exporters forced into what they now call unwanted pauses. In Iowa, a mid-sized soybean exporter had to delay a major shipment to Japan because they couldn't find a carrier. They waited more than 10 days long enough for bank interest on the unsold goods to trigger a contractual penalty. In Kansas, a 600-acre corn farm halted its harvest mid-season because there were no empty containers available. And when containers stop moving, crops still in the field are left to die, waiting. The most alarming part, it's not due to a lack of containers or trucks, but a system so distorted that full containers are now just sitting idle. Shipping companies worried about a shortage of return cargo from Asia have stopped accepting westbound shipments altogether. One regional carrier even told its teams internally, unless freight rates rise by at least 30%, there's no reason to keep servicing West Coast US ports this quarter. That dangerous loop is now feeding itself with terrifying speed. No ship goods pile up in warehouses. Full warehouses, exporters can't get paid. No cash, no new materials, no hiring, no shipping contracts. The cash flow freeze chokes the supply chain, not because someone sabotaged it, but because every single link is now too afraid of risk and hitting the brakes just to survive. In Chicago and Memphis, two strategic logistics hubs, small and mid-sized logistics firms have slashed staff by up to 50% in less than 3 months. One transshipment warehouse in Missouri temporarily shut down after receiving no incoming orders for 8 straight weeks. They're not calling it bankruptcy, they're calling it preventive action. But everyone knows it's a warning sign that the chain is fraying from the root. The biggest problem, there's no quick fix. Ports can't expand overnight. Containers can't be reallocated at will when imports are drying up and exports are backed up. International carriers are prioritizing Brazil, Canada, and Southeast Asia regions with more stable systems and less risky returns. Transportation, once the quiet engine behind America's mighty agricultural machine, is now its greatest bottleneck. And when containers, the symbol of global trade, can't even make it out of the US, it's not just product that's stuck. The future of next season's harvest is stuck with it. For farmers, this is no longer about land or yields. It's a question of survival. How do you move your crops out of your state when no one is left to carry them out of the country? When a can of beans becomes a symbol of crisis and American consumer confidence gets sealed away with the fear inside. If the supply chain is where products get stuck at the docks, then the grocery cart is where everyday Americans feel the cost of that breakdown. And nowhere is that impact more visible than in the canned food aisle, the once reliable go-to for families living on tight budgets and government assistance. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, canned food prices rose an average of 12.6% in just the first 4 months of 2025, the fastest jump since the inflation wave of 2022. A simple can of black beans that used to cost $0.99 is now $1.29. A standard can of tuna has climbed from $1.15 to $1.58. These might sound like small changes, just a few extra cents, but for those relying on every single snap dollar, that's the difference between having enough meals or going without dinner once a week. The problem isn't the ingredients. There's no shortage of wheat, soy, or meat sitting in American silos and barns. The bottleneck lies in the can itself, especially the aluminum lids and steel shells. Import tariffs on steel and aluminum introduced late in 2024 triggered an almost instant price spike in packaging materials. One major canning company in Pennsylvania reported that lid costs alone have jumped more than 27%, surpassing the value of the food inside the can. Transportation costs haven't helped either. With container shortages, disrupted routes, and fuel prices no longer cooperating, every link in the chain now comes with an uncertainty surcharge, a hidden cost that still ends up in the retail price. The result? Every item on the shelf is carrying risk the customer never asked for. For seniors, people with disabilities, and those living alone on support programs like SNAP, this isn't just a budget problem, it's a health gamble. When benefits don't rise with food costs, they're forced to choose eat less, buy lower quality food, or cut back on medicine and utilities to keep food on the table. At a food pantry in Detroit, volunteers say this year's budget can't buy the same number of canned goods as last year, even as demand has risen by nearly 20%. One warehouse supervisor put it simply, "Some weeks we've had to split cans of soup half per person, because if we don't, some folks go home with nothing. There's nothing accidental about this. From rising input costs and shipping delays to packaging disruptions, everything has conspired to turn America's cheapest groceries into out-of-reach luxuries for its most vulnerable citizens. And in a country that once prided itself on the promise that no one goes hungry even if they're broke, the fact that a can of beans now requires a second thought that's a sign of something deeper breaking down. It's not just about the beans. It's about the loss of confidence. Confidence that the system will look after those who need it most. Confidence that staples will stay accessible. Confidence in the basic dignity of a hot, nourishing meal not being swept away because a container got stuck at the port or a shipment of aluminum never made it through customs. When even a can of soup, a humble symbol of the American dinner table, slips out of reach, what's left in the cart? And more importantly, how many still believe that prices will ever come back down? Sometimes the scariest crisis isn't the one that hits loud and fast, it's the quiet one. The one that creeps in as prices tick upward as grocery bags get lighter and as no one dares plan for tomorrow. If you once believed America was the safest place to count on, does what's happening in our supply chain on our farms and at our stores make you think twice? What signs of instability are you seeing in your own town? Do you still believe the average American can live with dignity on today's wages and today's grocery cart? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes your small voice is the loudest alarm we need. All information in this video is based on reports data and real-world conditions as of June 2025. We do not represent any institution, government, or corporation, and we are not offering financial or investment advice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss important updates about the economy, where even a carton of milk or a can of beans can reveal the future of an entire nation.